Regularly topping lists of the greatest horror movies, the greatest science fiction films, even the greatest movies ever. Nowadays, The Thing is considered a horror classic, but it wasn't always the case. On release, the film was a box office disappointment and chewed out by critics. What changed? What did audiences miss? Is it all just a matter of special effects? Why, more than 40 years on, do we consider The Thing a masterpiece? Get ready for some spoilers as we unfold The Thing. In August 1938, American science fiction writer and editor John W. Campbell published a short story called Who Goes There? The story follows a group of people trapped in an Antarctic research outpost with shape-shifting alien monsters able to absorb and imitate any living being. In 1950, Campbell's work came to the attention of famed Hollywood director and producer Howard Hawks. With the era's terror of reds under the bed, and both rockets and saucers in the sky, Hawks was sharp enough to recognise a zeitgeisty story when he heard one. With Christian Nyby as director and Hawks producing, The Thing from Another World was released in 1951. While Campbell disliked it, Hawks only used the first third of his story, the film is rightfully regarded as a classic, becoming the template for hundreds of subsequent science fiction films. At the age of 5, a young John Carpenter caught The Thing from Another World on TV. In his own words, "I was terrified. Popcorn was flying out of my hands." Fast forward to the mid-1970s, and Universal Pictures, who had just acquired the rights to the film, were contemplating a remake of The Thing. After the massive success of his slasher film Halloween, which incidentally homages Hawks' movie, Carpenter was offered the project. While a fan of the original film, Carpenter felt that the psychological elements of the original story had yet to be fully exploited. Further, that he could improve on the monster of the original, what he hilariously called a blood-drinking carrot from outer space. After being confirmed as director, the film went through several writers before Carpenter found a staunch ally in Bill Lancaster. While hewing closely to the story in many respects, Lancaster made several changes, reducing the number of characters and opening the story in the middle of the action. When asked what attracted him to the original story, Bill Lancaster cited the mood of the piece: betrayal, claustrophobia, dread, and paranoia. The short story was a stepping stone to taking advantage of all these sorts of elements. To achieve such a setup, Carpenter called upon a variety of talent. The first 3 months of the shoot were conducted on sound stages in Los Angeles. The sets were refrigerated to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and water was sprayed overhead to create that authentic, cold breath look. John Lloyd, who had a knack for making believable and shootable interiors, was the film's production designer. Many of the actors would later describe his sets as very atmospheric, giving them a strong sense of place. The final weeks of shooting took place in northern British Columbia. The authentic-looking research station was built by the crew during the summer, and the scenes shot in sub-freezing winter conditions. Even during its opening moments, The Thing makes you feel claustrophobic and uneasy. Mountains in the foreground pen the viewer in. The camera moves around without a clear sense of whose perspective we're seeing. Is something lurking just out of view? It was at the suggestion of Dean Cundey, Carpenter's cinematographer, that the anamorphic aspect ratio, the widest aspect ratio common in modern cinema, was used for the film. This allowed the filmmakers to capture several characters at once, but make them feel confined in the frame. Composition further contributes to the film's paranoia and tension. A scene that takes place in the infirmary shows 2 characters surrounding MacReady in the centre of the frame. In the corner we see a character hiding a scalpel. Long takes meantime establish the geography of the outpost and give a sense of foreboding and impending violence. For the film's score, Carpenter employed spaghetti western maestro Ennio Morricone. Although a huge fan, Carpenter considered Morricone's initial work a bit too conspicuous. In the end up, he added some musical cues of his own and only used a few slimmed down versions of Morricone's finished tracks. It's easy to see why. The Thing relies so much on atmosphere and silence to create a sense of dread that many of the tracks would have simply overwhelmed the film. Oftentimes, the soundtrack is hardly there or not at all. 2 of the most dramatic and intense scenes have no score whatsoever, drawing the ear to the grotesque vocal and sound effects. The piece which features most prominently and throughout the film is Humanity Part 2. Reminiscent of Carpenter's own work, there is a creeping inexorability about the track. The telltale boom boom lets the viewer know that there is no escape. If you're enjoying this video, you can prove that you're human by clicking on the subscribe button. There are very few sequences in film that actually enter the public consciousness. Some 75 minutes into The Thing we get one. After Norris appears to suffer a heart attack, Copper tries to revive him with a defibrillator. As he pushes the paddles against Norris's chest for a second time, his arms crash through before being severed by a giant set of jaws. Just when we think things can't, quite frankly, get any fucking crazier, Norris's head detaches, falls onto the ground, drags itself by its tongue across the floor, and then it sprouts legs. Seconds later, when Palmer sees the creature tiptoeing towards the open door, he perfectly expresses the feelings of the dumbfounded audience. You've got to be fucking kidding. In this moment, Palmer's comment might well double for the work of the film's make-up effects artist, Rob Bottin. Living at Universal for over a year, Bottin slept on the sets, never took a day off, and ended up being hospitalised due to exhaustion. Only 22 at the time, he led a team of 40 artists creating practical creature and make-up effects that continue to amaze even today. Much of the work had never been done before, requiring days of effort and tons of experimentation. What Carpenter didn't want was a man in a suit. Bottin came up with a monster that would keep changing, that would have no final form. A word should also be said on Stan Winston and the film's brilliant matte work. Winston was brought in near the end of filming at Bottin's request to complete the audacious and gruesome kennel sequence. Bill Taylor, the film's matte photographer, developed a technique for lifting colour silhouettes off of a white background. He used this to put the team in several seamless, beautiful paintings created by Albert Whitlock. When The Thing was released on June 25th, 1982, it was neither a box office hit nor an outright failure. The film's critical reception, however, was a different story. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called it instant junk. Famed critic Roger Ebert dismissed it as an Alien knockoff. Alan Spencer of the science fiction magazine Starlog concluded, "It has no pace, sloppy continuity, zero humour and bland characters." Carpenter was left reeling, later saying, "I made a really grueling, dark movie, but I thought audiences in 1982 wanted to see that." Asked today why The Thing failed on release, any film historian would highlight a variety of factors. It came out around the same time as E.T. People were more willing to accept that film's warm and gentle view of alien life than Carpenter's nightmarish interpretation. The R rating didn't help. It was strangely marketed to children. The release date was all wrong. Winter would have been better. Personally, I think that The Thing is a film that was deeply misunderstood. It pushed the limits of the horror genre at the time. The creature defies and transcends typical horror tropes. It doesn't leap from the shadows like Ridley Scott's Alien or Michael Myers in Halloween. It seems to be an internal and an external threat, something that is apparent, take the creature's physical appearances, but also unknown. Who actually is The Thing? And here I think is the real genius of The Thing. Carpenter populates his film with bored and bickering blokes, comprising some of the finest ensemble actors around at the time. During the first 15 minutes of the film, the characters are introduced in a very simple and austere way. Gary shoots the encroaching Norwegian, Copper sees to Bennings' injury, Clark looks after the dog, Windows operates the radio, Knowles is seen with an apron, and Bennings lets them know about the weather, and MacReady takes them up in his helicopter. This is important because when the shit starts to hit the fan, we know so little about the characters that it becomes nearly impossible to identify in which body the alien resides. Carpenter ratchets the tension and our desire to know who the Thing is with each new development, each new piece of information. But he doesn't risk over-egging the pudding. Each reveal of the Thing releases that build-up, allowing the audience to come back down again, and then for the tension to build up once more. Nowhere is this approach more readily apparent than the blood test sequence, surely one of the most suspenseful sequences in horror film history. At this point, we would be forgiven for thinking that Clark is the Thing, but then MacReady shoots him dead, and it turns out he's negative, and just like that, all bets are off. I remember when I first watched it, after Clark, every test MacReady conducted felt like it could be positive. I was almost relieved when the petri dish exploded and Palmer started convulsing. One chomped up character and a stick of dynamite later, and the tension resumes. Knowles is found to be negative. Childs too. Surely Gary is the Thing. When his test proves negative, Gary delivers the perfect rejoinder to everything we've just witnessed. His line never fails to crack me up. "I know you gentlemen have been through a lot, but when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch." The audience breathes a sigh of relief. Continuing his trend of breaking the rules, Carpenter doesn't actually end the Thing in a conventional way. MacReady kills the Blair Thing and slumps to the ground outside. Soon after, he meets Childs. Unable to trust each other, the two men sit and and watch the camp burn, waiting for the cold to kill them. Multiple alternative endings were considered and filmed. In one, McCready is rescued and administered a blood test, proving that he is still human. In another, only he survives, there is no Childs, and no conversation. Neither ending worked well with test audiences. Over budget, and close to its release date, Universal decided to print the film for theatres. At the last moment, Carpenter convinced an executive producer to use the ending that is in the final film. The only concession was a scream, apparently intended to be the creatures heard during the explosion. Famously, an audience member at one test screening asked Carpenter who the thing was at the end. When Carpenter told them it was up to their imagination to decide, they said, "Oh God, I hate that." One wonders if they weren't missing the point. The film's ambiguous ending, the film as a whole for that matter, invites endless speculation. What happened to Fuchs and Niles? Who sabotaged the blood supply and planted the torn jacket in McCready's shack? When did Norris, Palmer and Blair become infected? Chances are we'll never have answers to all of these questions, but that's alright, because all of these mysteries are part of the thing's enduring brilliance. It took years, on video and television, for the perception of the thing to shift. Now it is a cult classic, something close to a perfect exercise in constructing a thriller. The Thing is that rare remake that improves upon the original. Graphically violent, filled with relentless suspense, and overflowing with nihilistic terror, this is almost assuredly one of the greatest horror films ever made. Perhaps one of the film's critics at the time put it best when he said, "It's a hell of an antidote to E.T. One thing's for sure, masterpieces don't come any scarier than this."